Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to cover some tools that you can get to start doing a little bit of your own air conditioning work. With the cost of what air conditioning costs to get worked on at a dealership or a truck stop these days, you can buy these tools once and they'll probably pay for themselves the first time you use them. Now, it has to be said that having the tools does not make you a mechanic or a technician or ASE certified air conditioning person. So having the tools is half of it. The other half of it is getting the education on how to use it. So I suggest you educate yourself. I have several videos on air conditioning. It's not that complicated, and a semi-truck is just about the same as a car's AC system, but bigger. Okay, you'll have 2 evaporators instead of 1. You'll have a couple expansion valves. You'll have 2 fans instead of 1. So it's just, don't let it be intimidating. If you know how to work on car air conditioning, you know how to work on truck air conditioning. So let's get started here. I'll show you some of the tools and tell you what I paid for them. And I'll put some links in the description below or in the comments, and then on the screen here if I can, to where you can find these at a reasonable cost. And you can start learning. This knowledge will be great for you, and maybe you can help somebody else. You know, this basic gauge system here is something you could carry in your cab, and it's going to tell you a whole lot about what's going on with your system. And then a little bit of UV dye and applicator, you can find your own leaks. Okay, so let's get started here. Probably the most handy thing for you to get, or the most useful right off the bat, will be one of these manifold gauge sets. Now this is from Harbor Freight. I paid $89 for this about probably 4 years ago, and I've used it I don't know how many times. So here's what it'll look like inside. You're gonna get 3 hoses with it, high pressure, low pressure, and then your yellow hose for application, an instruction book. There's a correlation chart in here, which will tell you, okay, at so many degrees ambient air temperature, if it's 90 degrees outside, here's what your high pressure and low pressure should be. Here's the gauges itself. Okay, this is not an expensive system. Little instruction sheet here, and then your valves. Okay, so what you can do with this is you can test your pressures, see if you are low on coolant or refrigerant, see if you're too full on refrigerant, your system may be empty or very low, in which case you may have a leak. And then you can also use this in the process of recharging your system. So this is a very handy tool. You can do a lot with it. Like I said, I paid 90 bucks for this. I'm sure with inflation it's considerably higher, but I'll try to find a reasonably priced one and put a link to it. You don't need to spend, especially for your first set, we're in the learning process, you don't need to spend a ton of money on this stuff. If you're using it every day, very different situation. If you're just doing your own AC work once in a while or helping a friend out, don't go spending your life savings on it. Okay, so manifold set. The next thing, let's see, is this vacuum pump. Okay, I paid also probably 4 years ago, maybe $110 for this 2-stage vacuum pump from Harbor Freight. You can get by with a smaller one. It's just going to take longer. You just need to have the vacuum on it that much longer. You could go bigger, but this is fine. Like I said, you don't need to spend a lot of money on it. So here's what it looks like. You need power to plug it into, and then your yellow hose would hook up right here, and you can vacuum your system. You'll need to vacuum your system anytime you're changing a component, anytime you're going to recharge it. So there's some technicalities to this where you're supposed to be a licensed AC technician, where you recapture all the freon that comes out of your system. So I'm not going to sit here and encourage you to vacuum out a full system and let the gases escape into the atmosphere. But if your system's empty because you blew a condenser and all the refrigerant is out of your system, there may be just a little bit in there. It's not like you're going to blow 60 ounces of refrigerant out into the atmosphere. You're just talking about residue, right? So fix your leak, pull a vacuum on it for a good long time, and then with your gauges, you're going to test how long that vacuum will hold. Okay, so again, this is part of the education process, but this is a vacuum pump. You're going to need one of these if you're going to do your own work. That's most of what you need right there. Okay, these other things are handy. UV dye. You want a UV dye that is for R134 or whatever refrigerant you're using. There's UV dyes for oil, for coolant, but you want the one for air conditioning. Okay, this is an oil with UV dye in it. I usually have a little bottle, 3-ounce bottle of automotive UV dye for air conditioning, but I'm out. But this oil also has dye in it. Okay, now in regards to oil, whatever, look up whatever your system calls for. PAG 100 is an older oil. That's what my Freightliner calls for. There's better oils out there. This is just an example of oil that's going to go in your system. If you're replacing a component, putting a new compressor in, you're going to need to add oil. Most of your compressors will come with oil. I don't trust it. I drain the oil out and measure it, see how much is in there. And then, like if I'm going to change a condenser, I'll put 1 ounce back in the system. Kind of general rule of thumb I like to follow, right or wrong, is every time you replace a component, each component approximately 1 ounce of oil. Cans of R134A, okay, or whatever refrigerant your truck, vehicle, or piece of equipment calls for. This could apply to trucks, construction equipment, whatever. Now there's different types here. You got cans of just R134. You got stuff with stop leak. You got stuff with an ice enhancer in there to enhance the air conditioning. Ones with UV dye. When I'm recharging a system, I like to put in 1 can with dye in it. I like dye in my system at all times, so that if I have a leak, it's already in there. Now, if you didn't do that, it's handy to have one of these injector tools. You've seen me use this. You can put dye in here and inject it right into your low pressure side to get some dye in the system, and you can find your leak. Or I like to use this Coolox product. I use this to inject it. It enhances your air conditioning system. Once you have dye in the system, I'm pretty decent at finding it with the naked eye, but it helps to have a UV flashlight. And you can go as far as to have the UV goggles also, so that dye really pops out. It's easy to see. It'll be like a neon green, okay? You don't need to spend, you can get a cheap one of these for 10 bucks in some places. I like to have some extra O-rings around. This will fit, I don't know how many different, there's about 18 different sizes of O-rings in here. It's a universal kit. They're all for air conditioning, and it'll fit just about anything on the market that comes my way. Anytime you buy a new component, if it's a condenser, a receiver dryer, a compressor, expansion valve, anytime you break those lines apart, always put in new O-rings. Most components will come with O-rings, but if they don't, or if I'm just in the truck stop, I like to have, a set of O-rings. I've gone as far as to, when air conditioning is out on the road, it's 100 degrees, I'll go to AutoZone and rent the pump and the manifold, buy some R134 or some dye, put dye in the system, find the leak, and replace it right in the truck stop parking lot, because I just can't stand being without air conditioning in 100-degree heat. So remember that. You can do the rent-a-tool also from different auto parts stores like AutoZone. If you're on the road and you don't want to spend $1,000 to take it into Freightliner or the TA with their ridiculous charges, go to AutoZone, rent the tool, do it yourself. Oh, I've got behind on the costs here. Oil, about 10 bucks. Each can of R134, about, 10 to 15 to 20 bucks, depending on what you got in it. This compressor oil is pretty cheap. Talking about probably 10 bucks for this bottle. Like I said, you can get the light for 10 bucks. I think this thing I paid about 30 bucks for. You've seen videos on that. O-ring kit, probably 20 bucks. And then most of your fittings for your air conditioning are going to be Torx heads to take the lines apart. So, a set of 3/8 drive Torx head sockets would be handy. Got this from Harbor Freight probably 10 years ago for maybe 15 bucks at the time. use the heck out of these Torx head bits. So there you have it. That is most of the tools of what you will need to work on your own air conditioning. Now, I'll post some links to some different air conditioning videos that I did. One in particular, using your manifold gauges to test your pressures and then what your pressures mean, and high pressures and low pressures, and then I'll give you a better understanding of how to start working on your own air conditioning. If you like these kind of things, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and we will see you next time.